and themselves in a much gentler way, and also to take responsibility for the rest of life on this planet. Now, for us, that means just not procreate.
Okay, guys, I did some research on antinatalism. Although I understand what the philosophy is generally about, I can't really take it serious. I think there are some major flaws in their logic, and it even feels like some people are only holding the position to get attention. If you don't know what antinatalism is, it can basically be summarized by the intentional avoidance of children.
I think this is an intentional use of an ambiguous term of avoidance of children. Antinatalism has nothing to do with avoidance of children. Antinatalism is a recognition that coming into sentient existence is a harm. The implication of that is that we ought not to create new sentient life, and therefore we should not have children. We should not create new children. It has nothing to do with avoiding children in the sense of avoiding at least existing children. This seems to be an intentional use of an ambiguous term here.
Antinatalists believe that you shouldn't reproduce since the child obviously can't consent to being born.
Consent argument is one of the arguments for antinatalism. You can disagree with that and still be antinatalist because there are other arguments like asymmetry, risk, misanthropy, and so on.
Start with the obvious arguments against antinatalism. Nobody forces us to reproduce. In 2023, there are plenty of people who don't have children. Having children is not a requirement.
What you're saying is the obvious argument really is that procreation or reproduction or the act of having children is a personal choice. If you don't want to do it, don't do it, but don't ask others not to do it. That's the whole point. Procreation is not a personal choice, at least in the sense that a personal choice is a choice which does not affect anybody else or at least harm someone else. In the case of procreation, you are causing a net harm to at least that one particular child you're going to bring into existence, if not others affected because of that child. So, procreation is not a personal choice. Therefore, this argument against you are free to do what you want to do doesn't hold.
Many people even claim that there is an agenda in the West that is promoting the childless lifestyle. If your life sucks and you assume that your children will also suffer, you don't need to have children.
This is sorry for the word, psychologizing the antinatalism argument. It is not that somebody's life sucks and therefore they should not have children. Antinatalist arguments are not based on some specific life. It is based on life in general. Now, you may disagree that life in general is bad on whole, but you can still acknowledge the fact that before coming into existence, that life is not deprived of benefits of sentient existence and pleasures of life. But when they come into existence, they have to go through serious harm. So by not bringing them into existence, you're saving them from all that harm, and therefore antinatalism.
However, other people might be happy with their lives and expect their children to be happy as well. If you look at surveys, most people do not regret being born. So why would you try to convince people that their children's life would be a mistake?
So there are 2 points to this. One is, of course, the optimism bias, Pollyanna principle. Optimism bias is the it states that we have a bias towards optimism. It has helped us, it helps us. It has some evolutionary reasons also why we have that, because it helps us being healthy, but it also shields us from the horrors of reality. And therefore, we are subject to all the biases like optimism bias, which have come through evolutionary history. That doesn't mean that we are not going through suffering. The suffering is still there.
Birth control gave us the power to have sex without having offspring. This might be one reason why we are in a transition period. Obviously, some people in the past only wanted to have sex and accidentally became parents. Maybe those children are the ones that are in favor of abortion and antinatalism. This is why we should support people in their decisions. This might sound contradictory at first, but it makes no sense to argue against abortions.
Well, I think there are a few points which are mistaken here. One, you are combining contraception and abortion. Two, you are saying that abortion is a genetic trait. People who think that abortion is right are going to be selected out of through natural selection, and same is going to happen for people who are using contraception. That is not how humans work. We have gone beyond the regular natural forces which just ask us to procreate. We have We have evolved beyond that, and we now think for ourselves. We are a moral agent. We can go beyond our primitive drives driven by Darwinian evolutionary forces.
In the long term, people who don't want children will disappear from Earth, and people who want many children will spread. This hasn't been the case before necessarily, since the people who only wanted sex without offspring hadn't had access to birth control. Now that this group is no longer facing the risk of getting pregnant, their genes will slowly disappear over the next 100 years.
Another point, I've already talked about why he thinks abortion is going to be selected out, and people who use contraceptions are going to be selected out, and why that is wrong. But he says 100 years. That shows that he has not only not researched properly in antinatalism, but he has not also looked properly into evolution. 100 years is nothing in evolution. 100 years is mere a minute, not even a minute in evolution. That's not how evolution works. It works very, 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 very slowly. And at least in the case of big, higher animals like us.
People who love children, on the other hand, will increase in numbers since their offspring will on average be also in favor of children. Maybe some of you will find it hard to believe, but nature is already showing this exact pattern.
If had you argued this sort of thing, let's say about 1000 years ago or even 500 years ago, okay, somebody could have listened to it because we were still being driven by, all the natural forces. People were having many, many, many children. A lot of them were dying, some of them were surviving, and then they were reproducing. That is not how it works in the modern society.
Most complex animals get raised by their parents. For example, a cat invests lots of time and effort into raising her kittens. All female cats are wired in that way, since cats who aren't showing this behavior got eliminated by evolution a long time ago.
This is a very simplistic picture of evolution, and it's funny you take examples of cat because I also have examples of cat. Let's have a look at an article from Britannica. Here's the one. This is about lions. You agree that lions are cats. And what they say is, although lionesses will nurse cubs other than their own, they are surprisingly inattentive mothers and often leave their cubs alone for up to 24 hours. There is a corresponding high mortality rate. Example, 86% in Serengeti. That means 86% of the cubs die before reaching the age of 2 years. You taking this example to show your point. Anyway, the point is this. Many species have evolved many different strategies of survival and reproduction. For example, in lions' case, they produce quite a high number of cubs. A lot of them die, some of them survive, and it passes on. In case of turtles, for example, some species of turtles, they lay thousands of eggs. And of that, 1 or 2 percentage survive till adulthood. Rest of them die. This is how it works. And it could be argued that in case of humans also, it used to work like that. People used to have 7, 8, 10, 12 children. A lot of them used to die, and then some of them used to survive and pass on. It doesn't work like that in the modern society. So your argument is not really valid.
Of course, this mother instinct only gets activated after giving birth. Antinatalists don't give birth in the first place, that's why this instinct isn't activated. That's why we entered a second round of evolutionary selection in which only women who love children in the first place will survive.
Again, this has nothing to do with love. If at all it has to do with caring for children, caring for their suffering. Antinatalists are antinatalists, majority of them at least, because they care, they want to save children from suffering. By not bringing these children into existence, they are preventing them from suffering. That is the whole idea.
Okay, this was only a long-term evolutionary outlook to show you why antinatalism is determined to fail. But there are also short-term reasons why people have opposite views on the children question. It seems like many people who don't want children came to that conclusion after having failed in reaching their life goals. For example, people who aren't able to make friends, make money, or get into a relationship might not want to pass on their genes since they assume their children would also fail. This is a reasonable and logical decision in my opinion.
Okay, we need to decipher this argument because this is a very, very dangerous line. What you're doing is you're painting antinatalists as some kind of losers. By whatever criteria you apply, they are losers. And so if you ask my opinion, that's what he's saying. If you ask his opinion, it is perfectly reasonable that they don't reproduce. This is eugenics. This is pretty much eugenics. Like these are losers, they should not reproduce. Rest of us should reproduce because we are winners. That is exactly what antinatalism is against. It is not about losers or winners. It is about suffering.
However, it's one thing to not wanting to have children. It's a completely different matter to argue against children overall. And this brings me to my next point. Most antinatalists think that they are morally right. I can understand where they are coming from. If someone is born, he will most likely suffer sooner or later. If he isn't born, he won't suffer. Of course, I would argue that for most people, life is an enormous net positive, and almost no child regrets being born.
That's not the point again. Whether it's net positive or not is can be argued. Antinatalists actually don't believe that it's net positive, but that's besides the point. The main point is before coming into existence, nobody is deprived of those net positives, of those benefits, of those pleasures. But after coming into existence, along with those net benefits, you have to go through some serious negatives.
But even if follow the logic of the antinatalists, there is an obvious problem which they are unwilling to address. Since they think that they are morally right, antinatalists claim that humans are bad for the planet. This is just nonsense in so many ways. First of all, the planet doesn't care. It's a dead stone in space.
This is a very dishonest way to do an argument. There are many antinatalists who believe that if humans go extinct, it will be better for planet. For example, voluntary human extinction movement. But what do they mean when they say it will be better for the planet? What does the planet mean in that case? What they mean is the biosphere of the planet, the sentient life on the planet. They are not stupid to not know that the planet is a dead rock. What they mean is biosphere and sentient life. So this is quite a trivial way to say that. Another point is not all antinatalists agree with that line of argument. There are many antinatalists who think that this is a sort of speciesist way of looking at it, that we don't consider suffering of other animals when we are talking extinction only of humans to non-procreation.
Now you might say that animals will benefit from us disappearing. Maybe some animals will benefit from it, but many others will go extinct without us. Most dog breeds, for example. But despite all of this,
Why is that a bad thing? I mean, breeding dogs is a highly unethical practice anyway. So if dogs, those at least those dog breeds go extinct through non-procreation, not through any kind of killing, along with us, why is that a bad thing?
the biggest flaw in that logic is, of course, that animals suffer much more than humans. Animals do not have painkillers or a medical system. They get eaten alive. That's how they die. If humans shouldn't be born because of their suffering, why is it okay for animals?
I don't know what level of research you've done, but it's an irony that you started your video with the interview of Amanda Sukrik, and who considers animals as part of antinatalism. There are many antinatalists who think that antinatalism applies to other animals too. I have made a video on this topic as well. It is called as sentiocentric antinatalism, which considers all sentient life as a harm. And Amanda Suknik is a prime example. She is a poster person of sentiocentric antinatalism. And it's an irony that you started your video with her clip and now you're putting this point forward. Doesn't make sense at all.
It makes no sense to me. In my opinion, antinatalism is a gigantic waste of time. People have reproduced for thousands of years. Everyone in your bloodline has reproduced and raped.
Before I come to the main point, I just want to talk about bloodline. This in and of itself deserves a whole video, but I'll just say this here. The word bloodline is such a misnomer. First of all, there is no line. You had two parents. Each of them had two parents. Each of them had two parents. So it's a binary tree. Why do we think at it as a line? Because we generally think as me, my his father, and so on. Because we are a product of patriarchal society. But it's not a line at all. It's a binary tree. Which branch of that tree are you going to select and call it as line? Because every branch is as valid as any other branch in that tree. And the whole concept of bloodline is meaningless. None of your genes, none of the cells in your blood, none of the cells in your body know or care who you are. What are you talking about?
It's absolutely delusional to think you could argue people out of it.
It is. There's nothing to disagree, and no antinatalist, serious antinatalist, is under a delusion that they're going to argue the entire human race to stop to stop procreation and so on. That's not the point. I think the point is, even if you stop one couple who are going to have a child from having that child, you are going to save enormous suffering in the case of that child, and also the whole lineage after that child, like that child's child, and so on. So you're going to save an enormous amount of suffering just by convincing one couple. Even if you do that, it's a big saving in suffering.
If someone doesn't want children, he shouldn't be forced to have them. There are good reasons why some people should not reproduce.
This is a eugenistic line, because if someone doesn't want to have children, they should not be forced. That's okay. You're sort of giving a personal choice argument, although it's not a valid argument. But then you're saying that there are good reasons some people should not suffer. And the subtext of that is that you have some criteria. Usually that criteria is of certain group, people with disabilities, people with, some serious cases, or people you don't like. They should not reproduce. And there are good reasons to believe they should not. We should, or these people should. This is pure eugenics. And but the contradiction is that antinatalists are accused of eugenics all the time, whereas pro-natalists like these are actually at their core eugenicists.
However, if someone loves life and wants children, there is no point in convincing him to stay childless. His children will most likely be happy to be alive. What's your opinion on antinatalism?
My opinion is you need to do a little bit more research on what antinatalism is.